One difference I think you see between Democrats and Republicans, especially when it comes to confidence in their electoral performances, is that Democrats will always be confident, will always forecast the complete death of the Republican Party, and will always say that they will win no matter what, while Republicans usually will say that they'll end up losing. Um, and you're seeing this quite a bit nowadays, with Democrats counting down the seconds until their progressive warrior can take the White House come 2028 and replace Trump. Exactly how they counted down the seconds until Biden's surefire landslide election in 2020 that was, 40,000 votes in it. And exactly how Democrats counted down the days until Kamala Harris brings a stunning close to the Trump era, wins Iowa, and, well, that didn't end too well. And much like those elections, I do think that in 2028, Democrats will be severely disappointed. But it won't be disappointed as in, oh, they'll only win by a little bit. Uh, it won't even be, oh, they might narrowly lose. I, as of now, believe that 2028 will be a quite large Republican win. And I believe that 2028 and even 2024 will mark the beginning of a new era of American politics, where Republicans become the natural governing party of America. Now, what does that mean? Natural governing party. That's words you can throw around. Well, to explain that, I think we'll go back to 1856. So in 1856, James Buchanan, after primary incumbent President Franklin Pierce, which is already in itself a notable thing, he wins the presidency, defeating John C. Fremont, the first candidate put up by the Republican Party, and Millard Fillmore runs on a mostly anti-slavery uh, position. Now, Buchanan probably would have won had they consolidated around one candidate, either Fillmore or Fremont, but there's a chance that he would have lost. Now, if I told you between 1856 and nearly a century later, in 1932, only two men would be elected president as a Democrat, you would laugh at me. You'd say, "Oh, Tester, you idiot. Democrats just won in a landslide. Why would you think that the opposite would happen?" Well, 1860 Lincoln wins, 1864 Lincoln wins, 1872 or yeah, 1864 Lincoln wins. Technically not a Republican National Union, though. National Union was built up mostly by Republicans, and they faced Democrats, so I'm going to count as Republican. 1868, Grant wins. 1872, Grant wins. Liberal Republican. The alliance is Democrat. I'm going to assume that Greeley ran as a Democrat, especially since he did well in Democrat strongholds. 1876, Democrats get close, but they do end up losing. This was close because of anti-incumbent sentiment after Grant's corruption. 1880, Democrats end up falling short again, though it's close. 1884, though, Democrats win because James J. Blaine was a pretty horrifically terrible nominee. Plus, there was a bit of fatigue from a massive stretch of Republican presidents, one in a row. Um, Grover Cleveland, you might know because he was one president who served two non-consecutive terms. Isn't that deeply ironic? That he's probably one of the best arguments against my point, talking about the only other president who will serve two non-consecutive terms for a while. Um, I don't think Biden's taking another crack at it. But he ends up winning as Blaine because Blaine's a pretty terrible nominee. Harrison beats him, and then Harrison loses because he alienates a lot of bases of support. You have populists not really taking from him, but this was general anti-Cleveland sentiment. Um, and Cleveland runs again. Tariffs are a big issue um, in this, and Cleveland's able to capitalize on it and win with a plurality. 1896, Cleveland's unpopular, and even though Bryan puts up an interesting fight, Republicans blow Democrats out of the water. Same thing with 1900. Same thing with 1904. Same thing with 1908. 1912, Republicans split the vote. Had they unified around Roosevelt, they would have won. Had they unified around Taft, perhaps they would have won. Um, No, it'd be less sure of that. Republican plus Republican combined for over 50%, though, so I'd say Taft would be the favorite in that scenario. 1916, Woodrow Wilson did run on a large anti-war sentiment, which helped him a lot. He had incumbency, and Charles Evan Hughes was struggling to balance the progressive and conservative factions of the Republican Party. And even so, Woodrow Wilson won by effectively about 4,000 votes in the state of California. Um, had that flipped to Charles Evan Hughes, that would have given him the presidency. 1920 Republicans win in a landslide. 1924 landslide. 1928 landslide. 1932 there we are. Democrats win because Republicans completely mismanaged the state into the ground and cause exacerbate Great Depression. Franklin D. Roosevelt was a generational candidate. Now, throughout all of that, you could see quite a few more Republicans than Democrats winning, and I think to some extent a similar thing could happen. I think to some extent it'll be different. Think of it like, I don't want to dumb it down, but like think of a point system where you have uh, control of the Senate. That's like, to put it simply, this will make sense eventually. Like, you get points for maybe how many Senate seats you control, how many House seats you control, how easy it is to win the House, how easy it is to win the Senate, how many governors you control, how many trifectas you can have. Like, those all boost your score in like this hypothetical game. And then the presidency obviously is the biggest one, has the most points, but can't be completely outweighed. And the point of this is, imagine Trump holds the presidency, but between now and the end of his term, every state flips Democrat. Democrats get a supermajority in every state legislature in 2026. I guess Republicans just forget to file candidates, or Trump like makes the GOP completely toxic. Do you think that Trump has much power then? And at the same time, Democrats also sweep the House and Senate. Do you think Trump has a lot of power then? Because even though the presidency is very powerful, if Democrats control every aspect of local government, every aspect of state government, they control the rest of the federal government, and they're able to invalidate stuff like executive orders through, say, the judiciary, Trump isn't more powerful. Even though Trump is the president, even though he can go around, tour different nations, he is, for the most part, completely in control of foreign policy. Democrats are more powerful. And the point analogy is this: you're never going to have equal balance in politics because we're not a Roman system. You can't have one Democrat president and one Republican president. One side will always slightly lead to at any given time. There's two ways to balance that. Say 4 years, Republicans get the presidency and they get a majority of governorships, and they get a majority in the Senate, and they get a majority of the House. But then 4 years from then, it swings to Democrats. 4 years from then, it swings to Republicans again. And that's kind of how it used to operate. Bush was elected. He had the Senate and House, but then it swung to Democrats in midterms. And then Obama was elected, but then gubernatorial elections swung to Republicans in midterms, and then Trump was elected, etc., etc. But it doesn't always have to be balanced like that. You don't have to have it be perfectly the same, where every side gets 50-50 of every different part of government. It's not like two children trying to share a toy. I want that, I want that. Then you like give them it for the same amount of time. That's not always where balance can come in a government. And as we see coalitions evolve, as we see, Republicans become more and more high propensity based party, Democrats become more low propensity based. Or I mix that up. Republicans like high turnout, Democrats like low turnout. Democrats are high propensity, Republicans are low propensity. You start to see a shift because if the presidency is 50-50, that same 4 years, then 4 years, then 4 years, then maybe 8 years, then 8 years, then 4 years. So it's always equal. Democrats are going to sweep because Democrats will always be more incentivized in the gubernatorial elections, in the midterm elections, in the Senate and the House. They're always going to get more control of local government. And then that's an imbalance. And you could say, potentially, that an imbalance like that could exist for a little bit. Like, maybe there is a time where Democrats control the presidency and the House and the Senate collectively for a while. And that makes sense. That's basically what I've been saying. You get your year, you have a great year, you sweep a bunch of stuff. then you lose, and you lose bad. It's exactly how politics goes: one way, then the other way, then one way, then the other way. Uh, it's exactly the fallacy that people fell into, thinking that Kamala Harris would win big. Democrats just got used to winning all the time, and they couldn't process what a loss felt like. But that idea that, like, yeah, maybe Democrats do uh, keep everything for a while. th- I don't believe that you can sustain that. There was this idea for a little bit, way back in like 2023, when it was considered that Biden would win in a landslide because Trump and DeSantis would split the vote, that Republicans would become so extreme, so entrenched in their beliefs that they would become a regional party. It was retarded, but a lot of people seriously believe that, and I don't think that would ever happen. Um, Parties will always adapt. No party will die, and if it dies, something will grow in its place that's effectively the same as it. Um, will advocate for similar positions, or if a party's back to into the wall, like you can't escape, then it's going to reorient. You saw this in 2016. Republicans were pretty screwed long term. Their current coalition wasn't going to work. You had books like The Emerging Democrat Majority come out, which, if Republicans continued down the path they were continuing down, would have come true. The idea that rapid diversification of America would eventually rule out any GOP majority, besides for some local elections, maybe the Senate or the House, maybe the presidency, once in a blue moon, if they're able to have a really good night. But the idea was Democrats would hold their exact coalition, but they'd get all these new voters to help them out. But that's not how politics is. And when Trump won the nomination, he reoriented that. And even if it weren't Trump, eventually you would have a candidate who changes the GOP base to remain viable. Maybe it could be as simple as a party just gives up a controversial issue. And because of that, they become more appealing to the average voter. Um, Perhaps it's the other party, it's cocky and moves too far to the extreme. But American politics will almost always orient itself so that the parties are relatively balanced. What I'm saying, though, is that that doesn't have to come from even splits of everything. Because what I think will happen is that the presidency will go back into that same kind of era of 80 years. Began with the foundation of the Republican Party, ended with Franklin Roosevelt's landslide over Herbert Hoover. I think it will go back to that to some extent, where Republicans will control the presidency more than average, but will lose elections like midterms more than average. Democrats will become a party that does well in midterms, usually gets the bounce back from a presidential loss, and Republicans will become a party that in presidential years will win. And except for some exceptions, of course, Democrats will win the presidency. I'm not going to come here with a straight face and say, pack your bags, Democrats. You'll be back 21-24. Maybe you can win the presidency again. Otherwise, sucks to be you. Democrats will win the presidency, but you will see a time where maybe 7 out of 10 presidents are Republican. Um, Maybe 8 out of 10 elections are won by Republicans. You'll see a time come eventually, if politics continues as it is, where Democrats will become a party more of local control, which is ironic because the idea is that Democrats are more of a national party, that they like to use power, the federal government, and Republicans are the party of states' rights. I really don't think that's true anymore. I think a lot of what Trump has done is very authoritarian, not in necessarily a bad way. Authoritarianism can be a good ideology. It's been wielding the power that Republicans have to enforce his agenda. And I think that you're starting to see that power balance shift where Republicans will use the national level. Maybe they probably hold the Senate more than average, but maybe even they'll have more trifectas than average. Like um, Republicans might get a trifecta 4 out of 10 times. There's a presidential election, which is a lot, seeing as there's three bodies you have to hold. Maybe compared to that, Democrats get a trifecta maybe 1 out of 10 times in a presidential election. Republicans can use that, but Democrats use these state governments as a fallback because I don't think the Democrat Party is going to die. But to have Republicans win the presidency like this, which is what makes sense, because Republicans, besides for maybe Georgia, usually do better with a higher propensity base. So either Republicans would have to embody a completely different coalition in midterms to keep it the same balance of half of midterms are good years for Republicans, half of midterms are equally good years for Democrats, or you start to see this shift in balance because you really haven't seen something like this before, where one party is exclusively high propensity voters and one party is almost exclusively low propensity voters. You haven't seen that fundamental uh, complete mismatch in a while, uh, if at all. Um, and I think that'll fuel American politics. So when I say that JD Vance will win by a bit, I'd say he's probably the favorite as of now. And I know it's 3 years from now, but for most presidential elections going in within the next few decades, I would say Republicans start off as the favorite. Um, I'd say the electoral map probably looks something like this going into a presidential election. Perhaps, maybe, depending on the election, slightly better for Democrats. Perhaps, maybe, depending on the election, slightly better for Republicans. But when you have a map like this, and you have Democrats at 198, Republicans at 219, eventually maybe you'll see something like this. Even if you want to believe in Georgia trends, which I think probably continue, especially Georgia might actually be the inverse, where it's competitive in midterms and uncompetitive in presidential elections. But even if you see something like this, Republicans definitively have the edge. And eventually you'll see states like Pennsylvania, not Maryland, Michigan become pretty heavily Republican. And you will see electoral votes begin to shift from Democrat leaning states to Republican leaning states. Democrat states are gaining in population. Congrats. Republican states are gaining more relatively. So even if you see a coalition like this, where Democrats have to break into a state that Republicans are favored in, that can happen. You can have a system where Republicans are favored in presidential elections because then midterms, let's say 2026, if this is true, Democrats have a good year. Most of the toss-ups, Democrats sweep, and if that happens, eh, don't be discouraged. If you're a Republican, that can happen. And in fact, I'd say that's more evidence for this theory because you look at Trump's approval rating, it's not great. It's like -5, -6. That's better than before. And I don't think Trump's approval rating falls off a cliff like people are anticipating. If it does, this theory probably is proven wrong. I don't think that Vance would be the favorite come 2028. But as long as polarization keeps Trump's approval rating and the real approval rating, in as much as a lot of people can disapprove of a party and still end up holding their nose and voting for it. A lot of people who disapprove of Trump will vote for Vance. It's not like Trump's at 40% approval, that's Vance's ceiling. Trump's at 60% disapproval, that's a Democrat's floor. That's not how it works. And I think there's a lot to be seen. This is not a comprehensive theory. I'm not going to bet my life on this. But I think there's a decent chance that Republicans could become the natural governing coalition of America, where on the national level, natural governing coalition, but even national as well, because on the national level, Republicans begin to form government more, but especially in places like the Rust Belt. Wisconsin, expect a few more Democrat trifectas. Pennsylvania, eventually expect Republicans to lose that state Senate majority, and Democrats start to get trifectas out of there more. Even in states like Ohio and Iowa could remain competitive into the future. Um, Other states where Republicans could potentially play offense. Like Nevada. Republicans probably are disfavored in gubernatorial elections there. Minnesota, you depend on a pretty high or low propensity base in these rural areas as a Republican, and unless you're suddenly going to reorient to the old coalitions where you sweep the suburbs but lose in the rural areas, you're not going to survive midterms. No matter how large of a wave it is, and I think 2022 is a good example of this because this it's not Republican ceiling. And I think the idea that Dobbs was the only reason Republicans lost is foolish. But I think the idea that like this is the best thing Republicans could ever do, there's no midterm that's going to be better than this, is also quite foolish. I think it's relatively it's like the middle case, maybe slightly worse than like the average midterm under a Democrat president because Democrats ended up winning Pennsylvania by 5. Had Ron Johnson retired like he planned to, Democrats would have also flipped Wisconsin. On the same ballot, Republicans lost Arizona, Nevada, Georgia. Republicans would have won Georgia if Walker wasn't a terrible candidate. They underperformed in Ohio, in Iowa, in Missouri, North Carolina, Florida, one of the only good states for them, though that's mostly trends. New Hampshire as well. Washington underperformance, Colorado underperformance, Illinois underperformance. Across the board, Republicans did much worse than expected. Same thing with the gubernatorial elections. Arizona, Republican win expected, Democrat. Georgia, kind of in line. Kansas, Republican win expected to some extent. People consider Schmidt the slight favorite, Democrat. Maine, expected to be close, wipeout for Democrats. Michigan, expected to be close. Even Republicans favored in quite a few predictions. Democrat wipeout. Nevada, expected to be somewhat close. Republicans did do okay here, though that's because Steve Sisolak was a terrible incumbent. New Mexico, expected to be close. Not very close. New York, Republicans overperformed here. And not saying that every state will shift 5 points Republican, or so from 2024. And then in midterms, every state's going to shift 10 points Democrat from them. I'm not saying that, but you will see, by and large, Pennsylvania expected to be close. Democrat landslide. Texas, even you could potentially consider this an underperformance for Abbott. Wisconsin, even expected Republican hold. If not, expected to be very, very, or expected Republican flip. Like quite easily, if not expected to be close, but a Republican win. Democrats end up holding it by a much larger margin than Biden won the state. You're seeing across the board, Democrats, for the most part, overperform. Same thing with here. Um, out of the core swing states, here, Colorado was considered a core swing state, but Ohio was like the furthest Republican core swing state. Like Washington was expected to be the same partisan lean, relatively, as Wisconsin and North Carolina. Uh, New Hampshire, the closest Democrat expected win narrowly win. Wisconsin, 9 points to 1 point. Democrats won every one of the supposedly most competitive states. But then we go to 2024. What happened? They split mostly evenly, but you see, by and large, Republicans did overperform expectations in most of these states. The closest state expected to go to Democrats narrowly, 1.6%. The closest one expected to go Republicans narrowly. I think Nebraska was slightly closer than Montana, but R plus 7. Pennsylvania Republicans pulled off a shock upset here, and Michigan and Wisconsin were on a knife's edge. While Ohio expected to be close, many people thought Democrats were favored. Not at all close. Virginia and New Jersey and New Mexico all expect to be Democrat landslides, relatively close. Well, really, the only close Republican held state was Missouri, and even so, that wasn't very close. After that, the closest one, Indiana. Like, Republicans overperformed in 2024, and I think eventually, either it goes back to normal. Republican coalition evolves without Trump. And I'm not saying that this is impossible, but the Republican coalition evolves without Trump, potentially. And it goes back to how it was back in 2010, 2000, 1990. Maybe. I'm not going to say that's completely impossible, but I'd say that America has probably its best chance to become like many other countries where one party is considered the favorite going into most elections, where you can name a random presidential election, 2036, and I can say, well, I'd say Republicans are slightly favored with that without knowing anything about the context whatsoever, just because of how these coalitions are made up, just because Republicans probably do better when turnout is higher, and Democrats probably do better when turnout is lower. But you can disagree with me on that. I'm very open to disagreement. This isn't even my theory for the most part. I'd say my consolidation of it into one video is, you know, the better advocacy for it than, just, oh, Republicans will win the presidency and everything, and everything will be Republican and Democrats will die. Um, and I feel like hopefully this explains it better. The idea of a natural governing party, the idea that, I think that Vance wins big. I think he's a much better candidate than Trump. I think that Democrats don't have someone who can hold the base together quite as well as Harris. Not to say that Harris was a good candidate, but to say that Harris was exactly what Democrats wanted in 2024. And even if she had to go through a primary, she would have been a much weaker candidate. But the version of Harris that competed against Trump was relatively strong. Um, Even if Kamala Harris, as a candidate herself, not this image of her, is not a strong candidate. But who knows? I could be wrong. And obviously, you can come back in 3 years and laugh at me. This is not me saying for sure this is how the election will go. Almost exactly 3 years and 6 months off. The 2028 presidential election and almost 6 months past the 2024 presidential election. I'm not saying it's a guarantee. It's more of a theory. And Perhaps I'm proven wrong, but I think I got a damn good chance of being right. So, anyways, if you like this video, subscribe, comment down below. We're trying to reach 2 million, 2 million, Jesus Christ. We're trying to reach 2,300 subscribers soon. Would be a big milestone. So if you want to help out, subscribe. We're getting very close. We'll also be covering some foreign elections soon. We have a big, uh, you could call it a Super Tuesday coming up. Very soon. May 18th. I won't be streaming that myself, but I'll be covering the elections that are happening then in Portugal, in Poland, in Romania, because they'll be important. So, anyways, thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe, like, comment, share. Godspeed, testers done.